What is up, everybody? It is Jeremy England with another episode of the All Things Music podcast, and I am joined with my co-host, as always, Miss Daphne Check. How are you today, Daphne?
Oh, I'm doing all right. How you doing?
I am doing okay.
Just okay. Only
Just
okay.
Well, we're talking about rock today, so that's cool.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of in a rebellious mood. But,
Amen. I'm feeling it today. I kind of feel it. Maybe it's just because we did all the outline and stuff, but I'm about ready to rebel against the establishment over here.
Which is funny because we're talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and that's kind of the establishment of rock. So I don't know where you fit into, you've made it, but you're trying to rebel against the man, but you're also being recognized by the man. So it's kind of a weird limbo to be in.
It's very circular. It just kind of loops around. I hate the man, but I love the man. But I hate the man, but I love the man.
Yeah, I think there are people that have just said, I don't really care about it,
Right.
Well, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, have you ever been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I was trying to remember, and I realized it was many years ago now. Of all things, I was home from college, and my former band director was taking his middle school band. I think it was his band. Maybe it was his music appreciation class. I don't remember. But he was taking one of his groups to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he needed an extra chaperone. And he was like, hey, since you're home, do you want to go? And I was like, okay. So I remember going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just as a school trip chaperone. And I can't tell you much about it, to be completely honest. I remember walking through. I remember thinking it was really cool. But the big thing I remember is on the top levels, there was some kind of Beatles exhibit where it was like these blown up posters and paintings of John Lennon's handwriting and Paul McCartney's handwriting and the lyrics that they wrote for the Beatles. And I remember just kind of looking at them. And I mean, when I tell you they were huge, they were tall, a story or two tall and several feet wide. It was just this giant exhibit. But that's the one thing I remember. The only other thing I remember is seeing Bret Michaels' Every Rose Has Its Thorn guitar, which I had to find and take a picture for my mother. But that's the only thing I remember about it. So I remember thinking it was really cool, but like I said, it's been so long, I don't have a lot of recollection about it.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way I was. I went in high school as part of a band trip, I'm sure. I don't really remember much about it. Actually, the Beatles sounds kind of familiar, so maybe we were crossing paths near the same time. But here's what I remember from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I got yelled at.
What?
Across the main hall for walking down or up an escalator going the opposite way. They thought I was goofing off, but I was waiting for my friends. So that's what I remember from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I just remember being kind of underwhelmed by it all.
Was it very early in its existence? Was it still not fleshed out enough yet?
No, I don't know. I think that it's weird because it's it's a museum kind of in a lot of ways, and they have some cool exhibits. But I also am very interactive, so I would rather. This is nothing against the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is more on me. I would rather go to the Science Museum that is right next to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and go play with all the fun science-y stuff because I can touch it and I can manipulate it. And the other thing I thought is always kind of weird is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it has a ton of exhibits and stuff, right? And they circulate stuff around. And it's no different than an art museum where you go look at stuff. This is so a weird divide in my head I'm just fleshing out right now for all of you who are listening. But they put guitars, they hang up guitars on the wall, right?
Yeah.
But music is also one of those things where you can buy somebody's really famous guitar and play it. So it just seems weird that I'm going to look at a guitar that somebody played. So and there's a weird separation between art and music because an instrument can still be played most of the time. An art piece it's done. You can't I can't add to it. I could, but I'd probably get arrested and owe millions of dollars depending on the piece of artwork it is. But yeah, I don't know. And again, last time I went was in high school, and who knows what I thought back then. But so that's a memory that sticks with me. It's a cool building on the outside, so got that going.
It is. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Since you were talking about you like more interactive stuff. Do you feel the same way about the Hard Rock Cafe? Like,
no, because at least I could eat there.
I mean, yeah. I was kind of curious because you are interacting in terms of the fact that you're doing something, you're actively eating when you're at that place, but it's the same thing where you're looking at all the memorabilia and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's funny you asked that because I was thinking about that as I was talking, and I do like if I'm like waiting around in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, waiting area, and they have like a guitar or an outfit up there. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like it's a part of the decoration, but like that's not my end goal. I'm not there to look at somebody's outfit. I always am impressed how small rock stars are most of the time. Actually, I do remember that. I remember seeing like all these
tiny people.
Yeah, larger than life, but they're like itty bitty.
Well, who's the best example of that is Prince.
Yeah, exactly. It's the first person that popped into my head too. Yeah,
he was like a teeny person.
yeah, he's so small. He like kills it. Yeah. So, but the Hard Rock Cafe, I am not there just to look at the stuff. I am there to eat food that's probably overpriced and get a cool shirt.
Yep, but I'll do it every time, by the way. I will do it every single time. I am all about, this is a side note about Daphne, I am all about those ridiculous kitsch restaurants. I am here for Hard Rock Cafe. I am here for Planet Hollywood. I'm especially here for Rainforest Cafe. I will go every time and pay stupid amounts of money, and I won't feel even a little bad about it because there's an animatronic tiger growling at me, and I am all over it. So I just want to throw that out there. Those are all
That's
good.
Funny. We have a Rainforest Cafe here in Dallas.
Oh, I'm coming. I'm coming.
Yeah. The wait's always like 2.5 hours unless you reserve, I guess. I don't know how to reserve it, but it's always like so long.
You gotta go get the big giant volcano molten chocolate lava dessert that you split with your family. Yeah, I'm here for it. Matter of fact, I would like to petition for a Rainforest Cafe in Ohio. That's my favorite of the three big kitschy ones, but yeah, but also I just want to point out too, back to the Hard Rock Cafe, they have moved that in Cleveland, and I have a bone to pick with Cleveland on this because where the Hard Rock Cafe used to be was within walking distance of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it's not anymore. It's like it's some casino or something. No, I actually haven't been to the new location.
Oh, is it a Hollywood casino? That's like all the Ohio casinos are Hollywood casinos now.
I think it is. I know, because we have a Hollywood here in Columbus. I think it is. Or maybe like a dog racing track up there. I cannot remember. I'm up from that. I am originally from in that area, but I cannot think of it because I've been gone long enough. But it used to be the Hard Rock Cafe was in Tower City, which was in downtown Cleveland, a couple of blocks away. It's a little of a bit of a hike, but you could walk it. It is not at all now, and it's somewhere far. So I just am like, why would you not have the Hard Rock Cafe near the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Doesn't that just make sense? Or like beside, I don't know. I'm just saying, Cleveland, what's up with that?
Yeah, I guess we should mention for sure it is in Cleveland, Ohio. I don't think we ever officially said that.
We got sidetracked by kitschy restaurants.
Is in Cleveland, Ohio, which is Northeast Ohio, if you're not familiar with that area. Drew Carey show is set there if you want to go back a little bit. The Cleveland Browns, obviously, are there. The Cleveland Guardians now.
The Cavs.
Yep, the Cavs. So there's a lot of energy there. A lot of pop culture is done in Cleveland, including the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which kind of seems, if you've been following along with other cities that we've looked at or anything like that, it's kind of weird that Northeast Ohio is the home of rock and roll, right? When there's like New York City and LA and Chicago and even like Nashville and Memphis, like all these big music cities. Because Cleveland really isn't known for like I'm going to go to Cleveland to record an album. You know what I mean? Like I'm not, right. I'm not going to Cleveland to drop my latest record, but it does host the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So we could talk a little bit about the history, I think, to start off with.
Yeah, one of the things that I found in my research was that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame kind of started before the building was actually built. It needed a place to be, but it started in 1983. It was a foundation that was founded, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Foundation. And it was, and I'm going to butcher the name. I truly apologize. It was created by Ahmet Ertegun. I hope I'm saying that name right. He's the person that founded this foundation. So 3 years later in 1986.
I was trying to figure out that year. 1896.
Yeah, I should fix that. In 86, the foundation started to induct artists, like actually inducting people into like this Hall of Fame. But at the time, they were looking for a city to build the museum. There were, I think, Chicago was in the running, Memphis was in the running, New York, I forget where else, and then of course Cleveland. Cleveland, of course, got it, and some people were a little annoyed by that. I think this was the right choice, in my personal opinion. There's a couple of reasons Cleveland got it, and I think the first one is really the reason that it should be here. There was a Cleveland DJ named Alan Freed, and he's really the person who comes up with the term rock and roll, which a lot of people don't realize that. And that's where the Moondog Coronation Ball happened, which is like the first official rock concert kind of on record. Yeah, we started having some rock and roll before, but they had this Moondog Coronation Ball. We talk about it even in our classes. It's a pretty big, important moment in rock and roll history. If you don't know anything about it, you should definitely check it out. But since rock and roll was kind of coined here and had their first concert, that should definitely shut all the arguments down, because this is really like the home of rock and roll. There's also, of course, there's a major radio station in Cleveland. I believe they still exist. WMMS. They did a lot of booking of rock and roll artists like Bruce Springsteen and Rush. People want to discount Cleveland sometimes, but Cleveland really has done a lot in the rock and roll part. I mean, just look at the reasons I just pointed out. But all that being said, they threw money at it. Let's be real. The money talks. Yeah. So the city of Cleveland pledged $65 million in public funds to build this building. So by the time you count the money and the historical stuff, it kind of was a no-brainer that Cleveland got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly put their money where their mouth was, like all the reasons you listed of like, this is why we're so historic. But yeah, when a city says we're going to give you $65 million in public funds, I mean, that's a huge win.
Well, and not only that, I was thinking about this too. New York, I love you, and New Yorkers, please don't come for me, but you don't get everything. And there's a reason I'm saying that New Yorkers, you're going to come for me. That was such a dumb thing I just said. But there was a reason I'm saying this. When I was reading about it, there used to be, in the late aughts, there was a kind of like mini museum in New York City. And it was kind of supposed to be like a sister museum. And it was in Soho. And the person who ran it at the time, and I cannot forget, I really forget the name, but basically was saying on the day they opened, well, this is where the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame should have been anyway. And I'm like, why? Because you're New York? Like, why? And couldn't really find a reason for that. And then I guess the guy got blasted and then he come back and he's like, oh, but maybe it should be in Cleveland. Memphis was a little annoyed too. I guess it was something I saw in my reading. They weren't as blatant about it. They were just a little annoyed, which, okay, but you got the Blues, so what's up? So I guess maybe this is part of my Northeast Ohio or saying this. Deal with it because we get it too. Like that, for all the reasons I listed, to me, it makes sense that that's why it landed in Cleveland, but maybe I'm biased. Obviously the money talks, and that, let's be honest, that was probably the biggest reason, but there's a lot of good reasons why it's in Cleveland. So, other cities, sorry, but it's okay that we have something. We had the Moondog Coronation Ball. Get over it. That's
if you wanted the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you should have invented rock and roll.
That's right. Exactly. That's my point.
I'm with you. I think it's the perfect spot. And it's like, if you look at like rock, I mean, where it kind of evolves from. It comes from the blues, right? And so it's moving up into the Great Migration that comes up after slavery ends, and the blues comes up, and it kind of expands out of there. In Chicago, I think Chicago would have been a good spot probably for it before like New York City or or LA, which even though both of them have huge influences in recording and performing, like there's nothing like a Midwest market, right? A rock market, or if we talk about, you said like Rush was booked there. Rush is a Canadian band, so you have like this major thoroughfare in Cleveland, just by Cleveland by itself. I mean, you have the two of the biggest highways in the country cross there, so like it's always going to be a spot. It has access to the lake. It's a surprisingly big market that I think people will not think about very much. But I mean, it's part of the crossroads of America.
100%. And that's why, like, you kind of said it, touched on it there. Like, I almost get where Memphis and Chicago might have been a little annoyed that they didn't get it. It was the New York comment that stuck with me. And I was like, bro, dude, like, look at all the stuff you have in New York. And I love New York, and shout out to New York. I'm not trying to disparage New York. That's not my point. I was almost a little like, what is your deal, man? Like, I was a little annoyed with him because the way he said it, I can see why it caused controversy, because I read it and it absolutely struck me wrong. As you can tell, I'm talking about it. I was like, dude, you've got all this great stuff in New York, and not everything has to be in New York or LA. Not everything. At least with Memphis and Chicago, there's rationale reasons why, with the blues transitioning up, the Great Migration, as you mentioned, like there's reasons that could have worked there. But I really think, the coordination ball, the Moondog coordination ball shuts it down.
Yeah. And I think like maybe it's because we study music and we are from Ohio.
That's true.
But like, I don't think of New York City as a rock and roll city. I never really have. I think of classical music and I think of hip hop.
Broadway,
right? That's like the two things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Broadway. Those are like the things that come to my mind when I think of New York City. I don't think of rock and roll.
I don't either
at all.
I will think of a little. I do get a little punk, but outside of that, but even then, that's to me that's a little stretch. And that is, again, that's not to say that New York doesn't have a musical influence. A lot of cities, a lot of major metropolitan areas in the United States have some kind of influence on rock and roll because it's such a big genre, because there's a lot of recording there, because there's a lot of people there. But New York is not really the rock place. For rock, you do generally think more Midwestern kind of places.
Yeah, it's been pretty fascinating. So since moving down to Dallas, looking at like where people are playing, like I'm still trying to figure out the major venues here. But you'll see people like big names playing in like casinos. Like in Toledo, you might have a cover band or somebody smaller at the end of their tour, maybe play at the Hollywood Casino, right? And it'll be a great show. Mm-hmm. But Toledo is a pretty big market for like major acts to come through and like headline there. And so I think what you're saying about this influence of cities that have influences over rock and roll, it's also like big places to play. So like you can come through Toledo on a one tour stop from Chicago to Cleveland, so like there's going to be a major market in this area. And rock and roll has always been a way of the teenager, right? And I think when you think of like rock and roll, again, this is my bias, but when I think of rock, I'm thinking of like young kind of like early rock garage band type stuff, which to me is just, that's the Midwest. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? That's what you do. And like
I totally
not
agree.
like, and when you're expanding like Midwest, I'm thinking of like Detroit, Ohio, a little bit of Indiana, Pennsylvania, even like like the western part of Pennsylvania. Like that is, to me, that's like blue collar rock and roll. And then like when you get out to LA, that's when you get like very commercial, and that's where you go to make it. So, and then Northwest Ohio or Northwest United States obviously is like grunge and all that kind of sludgy rock. But yeah, I don't know. I think the more I talk about it, the more I would be. If we went back, I would not change where this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame landed.
Agreed.
So $65 million is I mean, at that time, I'm sure in the 80s was probably a lot of money. And people might ask, like, why would a city pay so much money to like public funds, and this always comes up with sports stadiums too, because all this money, like
yes.
public funds are taxes, basically. When you break it down, and it's because when you have like a major institution, in this case, a cultural institution, it brings people to the city, right? I mean, it brings every year. There's a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction.
Yep.
And so you're bringing these legends, and you're bringing commerce to the area. You're bringing business for people who want to see what rock and roll is. So, like, I'm sure they've made their money back. Plus, in the past, 30 years, it's been 40 years. Gosh, how old are we? 50 years? I don't know how many years has it been, Daphne?
Wait,
years?
you were just doing math earlier. Now you're asking me to do math? Wait,
that's
what?
a lot of years.
Okay, well, so I'm 41, and I was born in 80, so 83. So yeah, just about 38 years. That's when it started.
Rough.
What do you mean? That's what? Hello.
I mean, it makes me feel old.
Wow.
So
okay, you're like 7 years younger than me, bro. What are you doing?
I apologize.
No, you
rock and
don't.
roll.
You're so lying. Anyway.
So the groundbreaking. So they pledge this money. They win the contract. This whole side tangent aside, they win the contracts. They say we're going to pay a bunch of money to build it here, or we're going to build it. And they said, okay, cool, thank you. So it's not until '93 that the groundbreaking actually happens, and it's like what, 2 years that it takes to build it.
It does. It takes a whole 2 years. There was at the groundbreaking ceremony. They did like a little concert there too to kind of celebrate. Basically, anything that happens at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame gets a concert, right? So the groundbreaking happens in 93, and then September 1st, 1995 is when the museum opened. Big concert at Cleveland Municipal Stadium, RIP Cleveland Municipal Stadium. It included musicians like Bruce Springsteen, Chuck Berry, Aretha Franklin, and Jerry Lee Lewis. I believe, if I remember my reading correctly, that it also was a little bit of a fundraiser for something, not just the museum, but it was a really big deal. I vaguely remember this as a high schooler. I would have been in high school at this time, but given that it was in the fall, I would have been all in marching band, so it's all a blur. But I vaguely remember this happening and it being a really big deal when it finally did open.
Yeah. It's a cool spot now, too. I know, RIP the Municipal Stadium.
Oh, man, that could be a whole other situation, but yeah.
Browns would have been still there, right?
Yep.
For a couple more years.
Yep.
So the good news is there's a much nicer Brown Stadium right next to it now. So
yeah. I miss Cleveland Municipal because that's where I saw Genesis as a kid. So yeah. I'm a little like, oh, like, but either way, but it's, again, if you're from Northeast Ohio, you have probably a little bit of sentimental memories for Cleveland Municipal Stadium.
Yeah. And so September 1st, I was thinking like, they must have slipped it in right before the lake effect snow starts happening, right? That's,
for sure.
The other thing about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is interesting is you can't have a lot of outdoor concerts. So like to slip this concert in right in September is a good time because it is cold and snowy otherwise.
Yeah, it doesn't take long for Cleveland to get to winter. I think probably by mid-October they're starting the word snow by that point. So this gives them plenty of time to enjoy before everybody gets locked down because Cleveland is a rough place in the winter with all that lake effect snow.
Yeah. The outside of the building is pretty cool looking, right? It's got like this big glass triangle as you walk up to it, and the location now it's kind of like a plaza, if I'm remembering correctly. You got like the city kind of behind you. It's right on the lake. To the left of it, I think, is the new football stadium. To the right of it is the Science Museum, which is a ton of fun. So it's a really cool spot. It looks great. I just remember thinking it looks smaller on the outside than I would think a Hall of Fame looks like. But once you go inside, it is massive.
I think the same thing, Jeremy. I even when I'm looking at pictures, I'm like, how can it house all this stuff? Because it looks big. Don't get me wrong. It definitely looks like a big building, but it doesn't look like it should house as much as it does. It's very deceiving.
Kind of like the Louvre, like that's what it reminds me of. For some reason,
well, probably just because that glass and the shape. Because I've never been to Europe, but isn't the Louvre kind of angled too?
Yeah.
I watched the Da Vinci Code.
There you go. That's all you need.
That's all I need. That's obviously enough European history.
It has a big glass triangle in front of it, too. So that's probably really the similarities.
Yep. Yes, I'm clearly an expert on that, too. But yeah, so the building has 7 levels. Well, at least according to Wikipedia. The Hall of Fame website really only highlights 3. So I think that they're counting it. Either the Hall of Fame website is counting it as certain levels of stuff, like they're counting it by the stuff, not the actual level, or some of the levels are just off to the public, or the meeting rooms, or you can rent out the space for like whatever, like weddings, like you can any big place. So I'm wondering if some of those levels are for that too. There are some levels that have like rotating or temporary exhibits that are specific to groups or genre or whatever. I think the one that I was referring to, maybe Jeremy, since we might have been there at the same time, the Beatles exhibit that I was talking about with the big posters and the writings of John Lennon and Paul McCartney on those big posters, that was one of those rotating exhibits when I was there. And I remember it being toward the top of the building because they kind of hung down. So they do have that. So there's stuff just like any other museum or something like that. There's stuff that is permanent, and there is stuff that is changing to attract people and to change it up. And as we talked about, there's a lot of big, interesting architectures. We were just talking about there's big angles. There's a lot of glass, like these giant big triangles. They're dark triangles. They're like black kind of in color, or like shaded black, shaded dark. And these big triangles are kind of supported by this very large tower. And I think maybe that the tower is where most of these levels are that I was referring to a moment ago. There's, this tower is really huge. But if you're ever standing in front of it, you can really get a good seeing of the city skyline, First Energy Stadium where the Browns are played, the lake, stuff like that. It's really, really cool. And part of this architecture that the building was designed with, the person who designed it, his name was I.M. Pei, and he really wanted this like vibrant and bold building. He really wanted it to stand out and really catch your eye, just like rock and roll. So it was built, the architecture is very intentional to the intent of the building.
I think it's good to point out, too, and I think we've mentioned this in specifically the Trans-Siberian Orchestra episode about how art could influence other art, or could influence, even structural design in this case. That, like, how you design stuff, you don't have to be a musician to like rock and roll or to participate in rock and roll. You could be an architect and design stuff that is vibrant and bold, just like rock and roll. So I think it's a cool testament to that, and like how it can influence all areas of your life. And it is striking. And if you look at the building, it's kind of like there's very weird angles, and like stuff kind of juts out from it, and it's very it's unique. It is not boring to look at by any stretch of the imagination.
I'd say it's one of the more interesting buildings on the city skyline of Cleveland. It definitely stands apart. I think the Great Lakes Science Center is too, but it's interesting because they're right beside each other too. So you see this very, they're very different from each other, but also they're very cool, very cool.
Yeah. And so this main exhibit hall, this is like the big one right in the middle, right?
Yeah.
This is the one I got yelled at in.
I love how you're associating all this with, I got in trouble.
Yeah. Well, rock and roll, right?
Rock and roll. I'm throwing up the horns right now. You just can't see me.
So this is like these are this features the big people, like the
big people,
the grand Pumbas of rock and roll. So this is like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Elvis, rock, like just rock in general, and then hip hop and rap, and other cities. Which I think we'll get into hip hop and rap when we talk about maybe the controversial section of what people think should be in there. But I mean, it is, yeah. So we got the big people, and then we got other influences and breakoffs from there. So this is more like the main stuff that Daphne was talking about will be in this area. They might change some stuff around, but I mean, Elvis is always going to be a part of rock and roll. You know what I mean? Like he's always going to be featured. Same with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, who were part of the British invasion. They're always going to be important in the conversation about rock and roll. There's never like an area of rock that you could like talk about rock history without really mentioning these guys. So they're always going to be on display.
Yeah, and it's since these bands are kind of in the rear view because we're talking about history, right? History's not going to change. So they have a lot of these people. I believe Chuck Berry is also featured at this in this point. He would just seem like he would fit there. Probably a couple other people. I can't recall. I just listed some of the big ones we would know. But this is the part that doesn't really change a lot. This is the part that is staying pretty stationary. If you go up to the second floor, if you're done getting yelled at here in the main exhibit hall and you go up to the second floor.
I must have missed this one. Yeah, I probably got yelled at and left, so I missed the second.
Which, when you were talking about being interactive, this is the place where you probably would want to be. Yeah. There's second floor they call the garage, which, first of all, is aptly named, as Jeremy was talking about a few minutes ago, about, everybody playing in the garage and making music. That's exactly what this is for. You can go up here, you can play instruments, check them out. They leave a lot of help videos and instructions around this floor, according to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame website, where patrons of the museum can just go up and either jam, or maybe they've never really got to play a guitar. Maybe they don't know how a drum set works, and so they get to go up here and noodle around. What a fun thing. I think this is really cool. I cannot imagine it sounds great up there.
No, I'm sure it's chaotic.
Oh, probably. It awesome. Is so much. Yeah, it is probably so much noise, chaos. It's probably ridiculous, but it's still really a lot of fun. And I don't remember seeing this part when I was there either. I absolutely, the next time I go, though, want to check this out.
Yeah, I might go. I wonder if it's newer or... Maybe. I'm looking right here. They got rock hall. They got play real instruments. They got all the practice stations, and you can take your friends up and have a full band set up, which is cool. So it looks like they got stuff just lying around, like you said, and then they have an actual space where you can work with other people or your friends. They got the lounge, which is the cool spot. You the guitar and ukulele and sit back and be cool and laid back. Brand your brand. That's pretty cool. I'm actually doing a bonus thing in my class right now where kids are branding their favorite artist. So this is kind of cool, creating a logo. And this is cool. I don't remember this at all.
I think you better head back to Ohio and check this. Okay. Well, next time you come back to visit family or something, you should maybe take a day trip or go let your kids, take the kids, let them run chaos, just straight chaos in the garage. I think you really enjoy that.
Oh, I wonder, this is it looks like it's extra money too. So maybe that's why we didn't do it, because it was part of the, but I mean, it's sponsored by all the big people. Sweetwater, that's who I saw, DW, Gibson, Fender, Martin, and probably, that's it.
I'm surprised Yamaha's not in there. Are they not in there?
Right. They sponsor everything, so they probably...
I was like, that's what you didn't say. I was very... Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it is interesting. So that's cool. It must be a cool little... Yeah, man, that sounds like a lot of fun.
All right. This is happening now. It's now going to happen. Got to come back and check this out. So there's also a third floor, and this is where you go when you want to see the Hall of Famers. This is where it's sectioned off by year. So that you can see each year's inductee class. And there's a in memoriam exhibit. So for artists who have passed, there's things up there. There's a signature gallery. This I do remember. There's where you can see the signatures of the celebrities. So you can even trace your favorite celebrities signature. You could do the whole what is it people used to do with gravestones? They'd put paper on it and then run a pencil over it, and the markings of the gravestone would be on it. You know what I'm talking about?
I know.
I don't know what the practice is called, but yeah, it's that kind of thing. You could do that here, I would assume, too. So I think that's pretty cool. And this, like I said, this is where you want to go to see the people who actually are in the Hall of Fame. And it's important to note, there's a difference between somebody having some of their things in there, like their guitars or their drumsticks or something like that. It's another thing, though, to be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was looking at these different levels. So you got I think it's so cool to see the signatures. I do remember that because I love writing. I love how people write. And I think it's just a fascinating thing about how our it's a whole thing. Mm-hmm. But I do remember that as probably one of my favorite things there. I am looking at Jimi Hendrix's, the one they feature on level 3. Yeah, this is super cool stuff. There are 2 more levels on their website I was looking at here.
Oh, yeah?
Level 4 is Pink Floyd's The Wall. So I don't know if this is like temporary, but it is stand beneath the Pink Floyd tour replica of The Wall designed to mirror the Berlin performance in July 21st, my birthday, by the way, 1990.
Hey.
So that's pretty cool. It's like huge, like creepy pieces. And then level 5 is Legends of Rock, known as the staple of the Rock Hall for over 20 years. Legends of Rock, an exhibit featuring handwritten drafts of hit singles. I think this is cool too. So this is their outfits and instruments. I guess they maybe change this out, but I think it's so cool to see like people's journal pages of what they wrote. Like the Beatles thing you were talking about where the letters are blown up, that's cool, but whatever, that's a picture to me. But if you have the actual paper that I can see that you wrote on, I love that. That's why I like art museums, because I can see the brush strokes and I can see like some dude or dudette, 300 years ago did that.
Is that, so have you ever seen the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution of the United States of America when you've been to DC? For that reason, you probably loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's magical. Like you just know, like people did that. You know what I mean? Like they did that. It's not a replica. It's not like a recording. It's not a picture. It's their actual. I think it's just it's magical to me. That's like my nerdiest thing I geek out about. And it's not like I know much about it. I just think it's like somebody in history did that, and it's been preserved for so long. So
I love that. I didn't know that about you, that you geek out about that stuff. That's really cool. But it makes sense though, the more I think about it now that I know.
But I don't do that for like instruments. You know what I mean? Like that's what's weird I think about it, because like an instrument. So like they're showing Tom Morello's guitar on the website. Like the one where we used to drill and it's like all tore up and all that. Like it's cool that it's there, but like that was used multiple times. So like, and it's still worth it. But a piece of paper like that, it's like that is the final draft of it. I don't know, there's something different, and I have to think about it some more. I'll have to really reflect on this later this afternoon of why that's different, but it's just, it is. It just exists. And that's cool. So there's my nerddom for the day.
I love it. We're here for your nerddom. That's what the whole point of the podcast is, right?
Right.
Exactly.
So let's talk about how to get inducted. How do you get inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Yeah, basically you just get voted on. There's a committee, like, let's be honest, I'm just going to simplify it. There's a committee of like rock and roll historians who vote on this. This can be musicians, performers, producers, journalists, rock and roll journalists, those kind of people. They will just have a big vote. They pick anywhere between 6 to 12 nominees a year. So it just depends on the year and who they're trying to get or whatever. The performers, the people who get inducted, there's a ceremony. Pardon me. They're introduced by other artists. And this I think is really cool. The people who introduce them are people who were inspired by them. So if there's an artist who was really inspired by a nominee, they'll talk about them and talk about why they inspired him. And I think that's probably the best way to do it, because then you're really hearing some personal reflection on the influence, which is the whole point and purpose of being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. As we said, there's usually a performance. I mean, if you're going to go in, you might as well play in, right? And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame wants to rock out anytime they can, so they want to have concerts and stuff. But this is an annual event. This is something that happens every year. Of course, with everything going on the last 2 years, I'm not even sure how that worked the last 2 years. But definitely a big concert. It's a big ceremony. It's a really cool thing. As of February 2021, there were 338 inductees, which, again, I'll just remind everybody that it's a difference between being inducted and having stuff in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's people who have their stuff in there. There's lots of artists in there. There's more than 338 artists represented in the museum. But those are the people that actually have had the induction.
Yeah, it's a pretty small crowd. It's a pretty small crew to be in there. Do you know if the people who introduce people have to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame already?
I don't believe so. If you go in the show notes, we linked
right now,
the list of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees. You can not only look at who was inducted, but you can also see who was the person who introduced them or inducted them. Introducted.
Yeah.
I almost made up a new word. But so like, for example, if you go to the first year, the person, Chuck Berry was inducted by Keith Richards, who was not in the Hall of Fame yet, because this was the first introductory class or words are hard. Induction class. That's the word I wanted.
Yeah.
So I don't believe you have to be a member. However, it does seem like you have to be a person of influence in the rock and roll community.
Yeah, I'm looking through some of these inducted, I'm all twisted up now too. The people who are introducing them, right? And I wonder if it's weird to induct somebody into a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that you're not a part of. You know what I mean? Like, because there's some rock people that are inducting other people, you know what I mean, that aren't in it. In 2001, Dave Grohl and Taylor Hawkins inducted Queen, but they weren't in yet. And they're a shoo-in, but like some other people who've been around for a long time that did not make it in. Or like people, I could kind of see if you're not in that field, like Lil' Kim inducted somebody else. I just passed it. NSYNC inducted Michael Jackson. You know what I mean? So like, there are some people like, okay, you're not really like in the rock and roll world, so it kind of makes sense. But to be like, yeah, you can induct these people, but you can't be in it.
Well, and I also think that there is some of these people. Some of this is generational because some of these people are inducting their heroes. And so maybe they're the people who's doing the introductions or inductions are not far enough or influential enough in rock and roll yet. They're still growing and learning. So like in 10 years, maybe they will be. But at the moment, they're just talking about how they got inspired by this person. Do you know what I mean? So I think there might be some generational stuff here.
Here's a outlier. Tom Hanks inducted somebody into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He inducted the Dave Clark Five, which is pretty – he's like one of the main non-musicians that are inducting people in here. That's pretty funny.
Well, I'm looking right now that Chris Rock was the person who took care of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's a really interesting one. And look at this one. Harry Belafonte and Spike Lee inducted Public Enemy.
It don't make any sense. I love it.
I do kind of love it. This is a fascinating study here of who
Questlove inducts Hall & Oates. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh. This is hilarious. Yeah, I'm definitely like scrolling through here some of these. Like, where did you come from? David Letterman put in Pearl Jam.
All right. Kid Rock has inducted like 3 people into the Hall of Fame.
Wow. This is amazing. Like how some of these were. I'm shocked. I'm shocked at some of these, but I guess
Howard Stern inducts Bon Jovi.
Really?
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so rock and roll, baby. Yeah. It's just so much fun. Okay, we got off on a tangent.
We did get off on a tangent, which is a tangent we plan to go on in a few minutes. But anyway, moving on.
Okay, so some artists get in more than one time. So how do you do that, you'd ask? Well, they can get in as a band, as a part of a band, and then again for their solo work. So John Lennon gets in for the Beatles in '88, and then he gets in for his solo work in 1994. So you can be so amazing and so influential that you can get in more than one time, which I think is super cool. Very few people are inducted without being an artist. So there's a specific award called I'm going to say this name now since you said it earlier, the Amit Erdogan. It's a tough word.
That's a hard name.
So this is an award specifically designed for non-performers because you can be rock and roll and not be a performer. You know what I mean? You can like live and breathe and do everything rock and roll, but just have no musical chops. So these are people like Alan Freed, who's the DJ, right? That did the coin rock and roll. Barry Gordy Jr., Dick Clark, Quincy Jones. So obviously huge influences in music and rock and roll specifically. Like there would be no name rock and roll, maybe there would be, but the name that we have was attributed to Alan Freed. So obviously he gets to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Right. And for how much Dick Clark has done for rock and roll, he would be a fascinating study sometime. But Dick Clark with the American Bandstand and all that, he really wasn't a performer, but my goodness, what he did for rock and roll is amazing. So it's nice that there's this category. I read a little bit that there was some... I don't know if controversy is the right word, but people were a little like, no, to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you have to be a performer. But there's so many people who have assisted or helped with rock and roll, published, journalized, am I making up words today? Wrote about rock and roll, hosted shows, produced, all that stuff that, rock and roll doesn't just get off the ground from the players and from the musicians. There's so many hands involved. And so I think it's nice actually that there's a non-performer category. They're in their own kind of world, but they're still recognized for their contributions to rock and roll. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So let's talk about what everybody loves to talk about. Everybody loves controversy, right? Everybody loves to be angry about something. So, are you aware or do you have any disappointments? And there's two angles you could take this in. One, those who have gotten in that you don't agree with. And two, those who have not gotten in. And I'm going to start because just based on I am upset and not very happy that
I know what
band Styx has not gotten into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I almost started saying it right when I was like, I know where he's going to. Why is Styx not in here?
I don't know. Here's the thing we didn't talk about. Here's the controversy. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is kind of political sometimes. Styx, and it's all its history. I forget if we covered this very much. It's always been a band that this is going to be a terrible comparison, so I apologize up front. It's kind of like Nickelback, not in the sense that their music is bland and boring, but that everybody loves Nickelback, but nobody wants to admit that they actually like Nickelback.
Thank you.
So, right, put a Nickelback song on and watch everybody sing and tell me, it's cool to hate them.
Yeah.
So Styx has always kind of been like that in the terms that, like, I think the intro of the book, I think I did mention this, is Styx was a band that everybody loved that nobody wanted to admit it. So I think and they always had some, I think they had some run-ins with reporters. And so we talk about 1,000 ballots could get sent out, right? And so if you've ticked off a bunch of people and you don't get voted to the top 12 or whatever, you're not going to make it. So there's always been kind of a beef between Styx and reporters. They're a little standoffish or whatever. But it's a very interesting because their criteria, I think you mentioned, it has to be 25 years since their first album. Is that right? That's when they got a...
I don't remember. I feel like that's probably true, though.
I think I read that. Maybe I read that somewhere. But so it's because you can't you have to have a certain amount of time before you can be eligible. It's not like you just retire. Here we go. Artists become eligible for induction in that category 25 years after the release of their first record.
Okay, okay.
That is kind of the criteria. So Styx has been around for since the 60s, so 50 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And they broke records like we talk about, but they can't get up there. They did in 2012, I think I read that the Hall of Fame has given a fan choice award. Oh. It's which that vote counts as much as the other people. So it's a popularity poll. You get one vote is the crowds. Mm-hmm. So there's been organized efforts, but there's other band Iron Maiden isn't in there, I don't think. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm Iron Maiden. Yeah. I'm actually a little surprised that. Oh well.
Oh, they're in.
No,
Sorry.
They're in.
Yep. So they took, but 2021. You know what I mean? So
No, they're not in, Jeremy.
Oh,
they're only nominated.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Judas Priest is not in?
Yeah. So
okay, hold up. No.
Styx hasn't even been nominated. You know what I mean? So that's
I'm with you. I got a problem with that. That's not just your fandom.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
crap. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
like that. Get sticks in.
Come on,
Let's go.
get sticks in.
Okay. I'm looking at like who's going through here because I'm like, well, who do I think? I think Judas Priest should 100% be in. I'm shocked that they are not in.
Yeah.
That one is blowing my mind. Wait, Pat Benatar? Excuse
Yep.
me? Nope.
I know.
Okay,
right?
here's my next one.
Motorhead. I mean, come on.
Oh, that's ridiculous too. I would
Rage Against the
say
Machine.
I would also say, and this is going to be some of my fandom showing, I'm a little annoyed that Phil Collins is not here for his solo work.
I agree. I think Phil Collins' solo work is better than Phil Collins' Genesis work.
Ooh, hot take.
It's,
Although it doesn't matter. Phil Collins, I love him. I have a soft spot for Phil Collins. He's definitely in here for Genesis. Genesis got in a while ago.
Yeah.
But I don't. I'm shocked that Phil Collins' solo work is not here.
Yeah.
Because he's been in the industry forever. So, yeah, there's some definite ones that should be here. I'm trying to go through to see if there's anybody that I'm like that shouldn't be in there, but I don't really see anybody. Although I think the question becomes, it is called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So, are we counting hip hop? Are we kind of making it like the Pop Hall of Fame?
That is always the
question.
The great question. Yeah.
Well, and I'm not posing a judgment on it because there's some people in here like Janet Jackson. She's had a tremendous influence on rock and roll, because she's had rock. Jay-Z's in here, but he's mostly known for his rap work. And so and I'm not saying anything's wrong or right. I'm just curious where the line is. I'm also curious, is there a hip hop Hall of Fame or a rap Hall of Fame?
I don't know that.
Because if not, there should be. Why is there?
There is.
Okay,
Yep,
good.
I guess there is.
Good.
It's
okay.
in, guess where it's at?
New York.
New York City.
Yep. Although I'll give them that one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That one
makes
rap in the Rap Hall of Fame, it makes sense in New York. That makes a lot of sense to me. But again, maybe it's because we're who we are and we know some of the history of this. But I think it goes back to the thing, and man, I'm always talking about this with my class. Genre, if you're talking about genres of music, they can swim in and out of each other's genre because they're often always influenced by something else, or they always have a touch of something else. So I do think it's really hard to be like, well, Jay-Z shouldn't be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Well, you can't really say that. He might rap, but he's heavily influenced by rock and roll and has put out some rock and roll influenced work. So I don't know what the answer is. That somebody smarter than me, but I think it's interesting because people get really upset when you put in somebody who doesn't classify themselves as that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just reading this this article right now, and it says, here's what they argue. I'm for it because I think rock and roll is a mindset and not necessarily always a genre, but of music. And this is what they say. It says, it's about time. Even in the early days, the Rock Hall was never exclusionary based on a strict definition of rock music. A great many of the early acts inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame were primarily R&B, blues, soul, or country artists whose attitude and performance style impacted rock. And no, not just the early influences category. B.B. King, Sam Cooke, and Aretha Franklin were understandable shoo-ins to the Rock Hall. And you're lying if you say rock is the main genre that they belong to. Yeah. So even early on, we were inducting, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was inducting, not rock people. Mm-hmm. So,
yep.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. I feel like that's one of those conversations you have with your friends, what really counts. I mean, that's a philosophical, not psychological, philosophical kind of discussion that you could have. But I think it's just an interesting, like, looking at some of these names, you wouldn't put them in here. I mean, there's some Motown folks in here, that I would have been like, huh. There's a couple people that I think got snubbed too long, too. I think the Beatles are one of them, which sounds ridiculous. We were just talking about this before we recorded. The Beatles don't get in until 88.
Yeah.
Which that's too late for them.
They should have been the first. They should have been the first class.
Yeah.
I think.
Yes, agreed. I think they should have been right at the top. But otherwise, I think there's nobody here I really hate. I did see Randy Newman, which I thought was
I
an
love
interesting.
Randy Newman.
Which
Yeah.
I love him, but he's one that I would have been like, oh, we're putting him in the Rock Hall of Fame. Okay, yeah.
Well, I guess here's our first class, just so you can get an idea. We got Chuck Berry, who's like writes Johnny Be Good, right, the rock and roll anthem. James Brown, Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, Fats Domino, Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly, rock and roll, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley. I mean, that's our first class.
And I would say most of those, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't disagree with pretty much most of those. I'm just questioning why it took the Beatles so long.
Yeah.
That one, I can't get past that one. I really can't. So
Yeah.
but
I am with you.
because they should have been in the first pass. Stevie Wonder maybe should have been a year or two. Well, the Rolling Stone, you can argue this till the cows come home. At least they're in. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of like a current band who I think will eventually get in, even though they're not there yet. What do you think? Maybe 21 Pilots?
Yeah, I can see 21 Pilots going in. You're going to really have to see. I mean, one, I think because they're a duo, right? Mm-hmm. And they are really changing the way that music is. I'm trying to think of other like innovative rock and roll artists that are just blowing it up, that aren't.
Yeah, and that's like there's not a lot of like
I wouldn't be surprised if like Gaga made it in, Lady Gaga made it in at some point.
Yeah, I could see that. I watched the Grammys the other night, so I'm trying to go through and think about who I saw that was a big deal. I'm glad the Foo Fighters are in, but they just got in last year. Took them way too long. I'm trying to think who else is. I'm trying to think of really great current rock bands, and I know there are some, but there's a lot of when we're talking about just mainstream pop. It's a lot of vocalists right this minute. It's not a lot of big bands.
Is Alanis Morissette in?
She has to be, right?
No, it doesn't look like it.
I got a problem then. She ruled the 90s. Maybe I'm showing my bias again. Okay, all right, I'll take it back a little bit, but she should be in the discussion. What do you think about Bruno Mars?
I would be curious to see. I love Bruno. I think his music has evolved a ton.
Yes.
He's hard to nail down. I can make an argument for it, but I don't know. That's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because he's like kind of in a funk. He just went through the funk,
Mm-hmm. He's got touches of psychedelic rock sprinkled on his work right now, I think. Especially if you see like he's really feeling that 70s vibe hard with Silk Sonic and stuff right now.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think Weezer.
Ooh, that's a good call.
Weird Al.
Yeah. But see, now I wonder if he would be a controversial choice. Because so much of his music is parodies of other people's music. So I feel like if he got in, we'd see think pieces written all over it.
Yeah, I think you're right. But he also is like...
But he's really good. Like, he's really talented.
He's so good.
Yeah, he's an excellent musician. People think that he's just a funny guy, but his skills are real. Very real.
Yeah. It's so hard to think because we are out of currently, I think we're out of popular rock music right now. There's not a ton of new rock that is coming out to the forefront. But if I'm thinking even my childhood, which was probably getting close to a couple years, I think of bands like the 2000s era. So I'm thinking Sum 41, Newfound Glory, Simple Plan. See, bands like that, I don't know if they'd ever make it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but that was the music of a generation to me.
Well, and I'll piggyback on what you're saying here. There's a lot of those 80s metal bands that were so influential in the 80s because of MTV that I don't know if they'd make it in. But again, I think that's a generational thing that you could argue they belong here. For the same reasons you're pointing out.
Yeah, it is hard to pick. If you look at each class, let's say our latest inductees, you got to pick bands. Well, the problem is they're inducting people in who are like beyond our generation. You know what I mean? Like these are bands, a lot of like Journey. I mean, that's like 70s, 80s. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yes, Bon Jovi. They're still touring, but like their major contributions to rock were past that heyday. So it's going to be a long time, I think, for a lot of people. You really, really have to pick really well. Def Leppard, I mean, 2019. Who are we at? We're in 2022 now, so 2021.
So maybe
Tina
like
Turner
in
just
10,
got
in 10 more years, maybe we'll see the 90s bands more. Like maybe we'll see the Goo Goo Dolls, Matchbox 20, folks like that. I did see Dave Matthews Band got nominated, but is not in it. And that surprises me just because of the popularity and following they kind of have.
Well, any of those jam bands.
Well,
Fish,
that's true. Oh,
Dave
yeah,
Matthews,
Fish. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about
who's the other one I can't think about right now. But like, Allman Brothers in.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, they're in.
Okay.
Yep. So 95. So yeah. So just even like these huge genres that change the game.
Well, and like
in terms.
Yeah, and like I said, when I was talking a few minutes ago about it being generational, I think maybe in 10 years, like if we go revisit this podcast 10 years from now, we'll be laughing because we're like, dude, all those people we said got in. You know what I mean?
Except Styx, probably. So.
You're bitter. You're not wrong for being bitter.
One day.
Man,
so,
I'm going to hear you scream from Texas if the week they get in. I'll hear it.
They're getting old, man. They're not going to be able to perform. So
I know. That's kind of sad.
And I'll say that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame can be a great unifier or another great flash in the pan for controversy. Because what will happen is, like, if Styx gets inducted, right, everybody from the band, especially in their heyday, will get inducted. So that means, like, Dennis DeYoung will be there. So, like, if they might, that might not happen just because they might not perform together, or there might be too much bad blood there as well. Yeah. So, there's all those other elements to it as well. I think Guns N' Roses is a famous example of people coming together and putting aside the differences to perform for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. So, a few of the things, concerts and events, you could go. I mean, they got live performances there. It is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so, they're going to have live shows. Their website is really cool. I was just on there looking through and scrolling through all their stuff. They got the Rock Hall EDU, which is for teachers and schools to help students learn about rock and music through rock, which is pretty cool. They got lessons plans, activities, playlists, videos, and just, presentations for you to use. And they have an outreach program called Rockin' in the Schools, which unfortunately is paused because of COVID-19. But, they do outreach because, again, like I said earlier, any Hall of Fame is an outreach. It's both a cultural location, but it also is supposed to be advocating for what they're the Hall of Fame for. So they're going to do outreach programs and stuff too.
Yeah. And that's kind of the point, right? After writing all this, I was like, why aren't we reaching out to Rock Hall EDU? Because some of this stuff, you can get online and stuff. I'd love to add that. And we're also saying this too, because we're at the time in our class where we're studying rock and roll, so maybe we're a little influenced at the moment. But I'm really interested to maybe dig into this more and just to learn more about it. I mean, this is one of these places. We were joking about. We're from Ohio, and so we know this, and we've been there. But it's one of these things that it's in our backyard, and I never go visit it. And why am I not visiting it? That just seems ridiculous. Right. So, it's worth your time if you're ever up in Cleveland. Definitely go check it out. Make a whole weekend of it, people. The Football Hall of Fame is just a little bit south of that, so you can just make your whole trip and plan your whole weekend. Go to Cleveland, go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and enjoy some rock and roll because, well, it's cool. The end.
It is cool. If it's not cool, it's not rock. I think that's how it goes.
That's right.
So, well, if you want to reach out and you want to share your controversial takes, whether you're for or you have another beef to take up with them, you need to let us know.
Yeah, send us your hot takes. We want the freshest and hottest of takes. Send them now.
The freshest and the hottest of takes. You can find us on Twitter at _ATM podcast. You can email us, contact@allthingsmusicpodcast.com. You can find me on Twitter at Jeremy P. England, and then our website is allthingsmusicpodcast.com. So I think that's it. go rock and roll.